LibriVox.org. Read by Ellen Preckle. The Broad Highway by Geoffrey Farnall. Chapter 35. How Black George Found Prudence in the Dawn. The chill of dawn was in the air when I awoke, and it was some few moments before, with a rush, I remembered why I was kneeling there beside Charmian's bed. Shivering, I rose and walked up and down to reduce the stiffness in my limbs. The fire was out, and I had no mind to light it, for I was in no mood to break my fast, though the necessary things stood ready, as her orderly hands had set them, and the plates and cups and saucers twinkled at me from the little cupboard I had made to hold them, a cupboard whose construction she had overlooked with a critical eye. And I must needs remember how she had insisted on being permitted to drive in 3 nails with her own hand. I could put my finger on those very nails. How she had tapped at those nails for fear of missing them. How beautiful she had looked in her coarse apron, with her sleeves rolled up over her round white arms. How womanly and sweet. Yet I had dared to think, had dared to call her a Messalina. Oh, that my tongue had withered, or ever I had coupled one so pure and noble with a creature so base and common. So thinking, I sighed and went out into the dawn. As I closed the door behind me, its hollow slam struck me sharply, and I called to mind how she had called it a bad and ill-fitting door, and indeed so it was. With dejected step and hanging head I made my way towards Sissinghurst, for since I was up I might as well work, and there was much to be done, and as I went I heard a distant clock chime 4. Now when I reached the village the sun was beginning to rise, and thus lifting up my eyes I beheld one standing before the Bull, a very tall man, much bigger and greater than most, a wild figure in the dawn, with matted hair and beard, clad in tattered clothes. Yet hair and beard gleamed a red gold where the light touched them, and there was but one man I knew so tall and so mighty as this. Wherefore I hurried toward him all unnoticed, for his eyes were raised to a certain latticed casement of the inn. And being come up, I reached out and touched this man upon the arm. "George," said I, and held out my hand. He turned swiftly, but seeing me, started back a pace, staring. "George," said I again, "oh, George!" But George only backed still further, passing his hand once or twice across his eyes. "Peter," said he at last, speaking hardly above a whisper, "but you 'm dead, Peter, dead. I killed 'ee." "No," I answered, "you didn't kill me, George, indeed I wish you had. You came pretty near it, but you didn't quite manage it. And, George, I'm very desolate. Won't you shake hands with a desolate man, if you can, believing that I have always been your friend, and a true and loyal one? Then give me your hand. If not, if you think me still the despicable traitor you once did, then let us go into the field yonder, and if you can manage to knock me on the head for good and all this time, why, so much the better. Come, what do you say?" Without a word Black George turned, and led the way to a narrow lane a little distance beyond the Bull, and from the lane into a meadow. Being come thither, I took off my coat and neckerchief, but this time I cast no look upon the world about me, and though indeed it was fair enough, but Black George stood half turned from me, with his fists clenched and his broad shoulders heaving oddly. "Peter," said he, in his slow, heavy way, "never clench your fist to me. I can't abide it. But oh, man, Peter, 'ow may I clasp 'ands wi' a chap as I've tried to kill? I can't do it, Peter, but don't clench your fists agin me no more. I were jealous of 'ee from the first, you see. You beat me at the 'ammer throwin', and she took your part agin me, and then you be so taken in your ways, and I be so big and clumsy, so very slow and 'eavy. There bean't no chance betwixt us for a maid like Prue. She allus was different from the likes o' me, and any lass wi' 'alf an eye could see you as be a gentleman. Ah, an' a good un. An' so, Peter, an' so I be goin' away, a sojer p'r'aps. I shan't love the dear lass quite so much after a bit, p'r'aps. It won't be so sharp like, arter a bit, but what's to be is to be. I've larned wisdom, and you and she was made for each other, and meant for each other from the first. So don't go to clench your fist agin me no more, Peter." "Never again, George," said I. "Unless," he continued, as though struck by a bright idea, "unless you 'm minded to 'ave a whack at me. If so be, why, take it, Peter, and welcome. You see, I tried so 'ard to kill 'ee, so cruel 'ard, Peter, and I thought I 'ad. I thought 'twere for that as they took me, and so I broke my way out o' the lock up, and come to say good bye to Prue's winder, and then I were goin' back to give myself up and let 'em hang me if they wanted to." "Were you, George?" "Yes." Here George turned to look at me, and, looking, drooped his eyes and fumbled with his hands, while up under his tanned skin there crept a painful, burning crimson. "Peter," said he. "Yes, George?" "I got summat more to tell 'ee, summat as I never meant to tell a soul. When you was down, lyin' at my feet." "Yes, George?" I kicked 'ee once." "Did you, George?" I were mad with rage and blood lust. Oh, man, Peter, I kicked 'ee." "Theer," said he, straightening his shoulders, "leastwise I can look 'ee in the eye, now that be off my mind. An' now, if so be you 'm wishful to tak' your whack at me, let it be a good un, Peter." "No, I shall never raise my hand to you again, George." "'Tis likely you be thinkin' me a poor sort o' man arter what I just told 'ee. A coward?" "I think you're more of a man than ever," said I. "Why, then, Peter, if you do that, here's my 'and. If you'll take it, I bid you good bye." "I'll take your hand, and gladly, George, but not to wish you good bye. It shall be rather to bid you welcome home again." "No!" he cried. "No, I couldn't abide to see you and Prue married, Peter. No, I couldn't abide it." "And you never will, George. Prue loves a stronger, a better man than I, and she has wept over him, George, and prayed over him such tears and prayers as surely might win the blackest soul to heaven, and has said that she would marry that man. Ah! even if he came back with fetter marks upon him, even then she would marry him if he would only ask her." "Oh, Peter!" cried George, seizing my shoulders in a mighty grip, and looking into my eyes with tears in his own. "Oh, man, Peter, you has knocked me down, and, as I love for it, be this true?" "It is God's truth," said I, "and look, there's a sign to prove I'm no liar. Look!" and I pointed toward the bull. George turned, and I felt his fingers tighten suddenly, for there, in the open doorway of the inn, with the early glory of the morning all about her, stood Prue. As we watched, she began to cross the road toward the smithy, with laggard step and drooping head. "Do you know where she's going, George? I can tell you. She's going to your smithy to pray for you. Do you hear? To pray for you. Come!" and I seized his arm. "No, Peter, no, I dursn't, I couldn't." But he suffered me to lead him forward nevertheless. Once he stopped and glanced round, but the village was asleep about us, so we presently came to the open door of the forge. And behold, Prue was kneeling before the anvil, with her face hidden in her arms and her slender body swaying slightly, but all at once, as if she felt him near her, she raised her head and saw him, and sprang to her feet with a glad cry. And as she stood, George went to her and knelt at her feet, and, raising the hem of her gown, stooped and kissed it. "Oh, my sweet maid!" said he. "Oh, my sweet Prue! I bean't worthy, I bean't." But she caught the great shaggy head to her bosom and stifled it there, and in her face was a radiance, a happiness beyond words, and the man's strong arms clung close about her. So I turned and left them in paradise together. Chapter 36, which sympathizes with a brass jack, a brace of cutlasses, and divers pots and pans. I found the Ancient sunning himself in the porch before the inn as he waited for his breakfast. "Peter," says he, "I be tur'ble cold sometimes. It comes a creepin' on me all at once, even if I'd be sittin' before a roarin' fire, or a baskin' in this good warm zun, a cold as reaches down to me poor old 'eart. Grave chills, I calls 'em, Peter. Ah, grave chills! Ketches me by the 'eart, they do. You see, I be that old, Peter, that old and wore out." "But you're a wonderful man for your age," said I, clasping the shrivelled hand in mine, "and very lusty and strong." "So strong as a bull I be, Peter," he nodded readily, "but then even a bull gets old and wore out, and these grave chills ketches me oftener and oftener. 'Tis like as if the Angel o' Death reached out and touched me, just touched me wi' 'is finger soft like, as much to say, 'Ere be a poor old wore out creetur as I shall be wantin' soon. Well, I be ready. 'Tis only the young or the fool who fears to die. 60 years and 10, says the Bible, and I be years and years older than that. Oh, I shan't be afeard to answer when I'm called, Peter. 'Ere I be, Lord,' I'll say, 'ere I be, thy poor old servant.' But oh, Peter, if I could be sure o' that dear old rusty staple bein' took first, why then I'd go joyful, joyful. But why, there be that old fool Amos. Lord, what a dotterin' old fool 'e be, and there be Job and Dutton. They be comin' to plague me, Peter, I can feel it in me bones. Just reach me my snuff box out o' my 'ind pocket, and you shall see me smite they Amalekites 'ip and thigh." "Gaffer," began old Amos, saluting with his usual grin as he came up, "we be wishful to wax 'ee a question. We be wishful to know wheer be Black Jarge, which you 'aven't gone to fetch him, and bring him home again. Them was you words." "Ah," nodded Job, "them was your very words. Bring him home again, says you." "But you didn't bring him home," continued old Amos, "leastwise not in the cart wi' you. Dutton here, James Dutton, see you come drivin' home, but he didn't see no Jarge along wi' you. No, not so much as you could shake a stick at, you might say. Speak up, James Dutton, that you was a leanin' over your front gate as Gaffer came drivin' home, wasn't you? And you see Gaffer plain as plain, didn't you?" "Which me wishin' no offence, and no one objectin', I did," began the apology, perspiring profusely as usual, "but I takes the liberty to say as it were a spade and not a gate, leastways—" "But you didn't see no sign of Jarge, did you?" demanded old Amos. "As you might say, neither hide nor hair of him. Speak up, James Dutton." "Which, since you axes me, I makes so bold as to answer, and very glad I'm sure, no. Though as to hide or hair, I aren't wishin' to swear to, me not bein' near enough, which could only be expected, and very much obliged, I'm sure. You see, Gaffer," pursued Amos, "if you didn't bring Jarge back wi' you, which you said you would, the question we axes is, wheer be Jarge?" "Ah, wheer?" nodded Job gloomily. Here the Ancient was evidently at a loss, to cover which he took a vast pinch of snuff. "'Ow be we to know as 'e bean't pinin' away in a dungeon cell, irons on 'is legs, strapped in a strait jacket, and—" Old Amos stopped, open-mouthed and staring, for out from the gloom of the smithy issued Black Jarge himself, with Prue upon his arm. The Ancient stared also, but, dissembling his vast surprise, he dealt the lid of his snuff box 2 loud, triumphant knocks. "Peter," said he, rising stiffly, "Peter, lad, I were beginnin' to think as Jarge were never comin' in to breakfast at all. I've waited and waited till I be so ravenous as a lion and tiger, but 'ere 'e be at last, Peter, 'ere 'e be. So let's go in and eat summat." Saying which, he turned his back upon his discomfited tormentors, and led me into the kitchen of the inn. And there were the white-capped maids, setting forth such a breakfast as only such a kitchen could produce. And presently there was Prue herself, with George hanging back, something shamefaced, till the Ancient had hobbled forward to give him welcome. And there was honest Simon, all wonderment and hearty greeting. And last, but by no means least, there were the battered cutlasses, the brass jack, and the glittering pots and pans, glittering and gleaming and twinkling a greeting likewise, and with all their might. Ah! but they little guessed why Prue's eyes were so shy and sweet, or why the color came and went in her pretty cheeks. Little they guessed why this gold-haired giant trod so lightly, and held his tall head so very high. Little they dreamed of the situation as yet. Had they done so, surely they must, one and all, have fallen upon that curly golden head, and buried it beneath their gleaming, glittering, twinkling jealousy. And what a meal was that! With those deft, white-capped maids to wait upon our wants, and with Prudence hovering here and there to see that all were duly served, and refusing to sit down until George's great arm, a very gentle arm for one so strong and big, drew her down beside him. Guess truly what a meal that was, and how the Ancient chuckled and dug me with one bony elbow, and George with the other, and chuckled again till he choked and choked, till he gasped and gasped, till he had us all on our feet, and then demanded indignantly why we couldn't let him enjoy hisself in peace. And now, when the meal was nearly over, he suddenly took it into his head that Prue didn't love George as she should, and as he deserved to be, and nothing would content him but that she must kiss him then and there, and not on the forehead, mind, nor on the cheek, but on the place as God made for it, the mouth, my lass. And now, who so shy and blushing as Prue, and who so nervous for her sake as Black George, very evidently clasping her hand under the table, and bidding her never mind, as he was content, and never to put herself out over such as him. Whereupon Mistress Prue must needs turn, and, taking his head between her hands, kissed him, not once or twice, but 3 times, and upon the place God made for it, the mouth. O gleaming cutlasses! O great brass jack and glittering pots and pans! Can ye any longer gleam and glitter and twinkle in doubt? Alas, I trow not. Therefore it is only natural and to be expected that beneath your outward polish lurk black and bitter feelings against this curly-headed giant, and a bloodthirsty desire for vengeance. If so, then one and all of you have, at least, the good feeling not to show it, a behavior worthy of gentlemen. What do I say? Of gentlemen? Fie! Rather let it be said, of pots and pans. End of Which sympathizes with a brass jack, a brace of cutlasses, and divers pots and pans.